Oh my God, what happened to your eyes? Where we're going, we won't need eyes to see.
Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys. Hey, you guys.
I'm Liam, this is Rob, and welcome to the Hey You Guys podcast, and the second part of our horror trilogy of podcasts. This week we are looking back at one of the finest horror movies of the 90s, one that bombed both critically and commercially back in 97, but one that has quite rightly been reappraised in the years since and become something of a cult classic. Rob, this movie is a massive deal amongst me and my friends. I think it just struck at the right time and scared the shit out of a generation of kids. Was it a big deal for you as well, or is this just me and my friends? Was this kind of like centralized just where I lived in Roath?
Well, it's official. Paul W.S. Andreson has made only one good film, and it's Soldier.
Oh, dude, we're not starting with this, are we? We're not starting with this.
No, I thought I watched this film twice, three times. Turns out I've only ever seen it once.
Okay.
So, saw it once, probably early 2000s. I would have been in my early teens.
So the right age for this, for sure.
Yeah. My early teen. Yeah, my mid-teens, sorry. And I don't remember too much of it. And then when I'm watching it again as a near 40-year-old, I've been reading your posts, I've been speaking to you, and it caught your imagination and made you feel scared. And I was watching it, and I just didn't feel any of that. All I could think of when I was watching it was, my God, Paul W.S. Andreson is in love with Hellraiser. Now, I appreciate that Hellraiser is a big influence on this film, but to the fact where you see Sam Neill dressed as Pinhead without any pins in his head, that is full-on Hellraiser. And I totally, what I would like to have seen is the near, I think it's 110-minute cut, where you had more of the hell dimension, you had more of that video log that had all the mutilate,
the really disturbing, famous video log, with all the sex and
flashes of the hell things, the hellscapes, really quick flashes. And to be fair, mate, and I'm not trying to take anything away from what you watched as a kid and what it did to you, but as I'm watching it, I'm going, and I was talking to Dave, a regular collaborator on this podcast as well. And he had the same thing. He said that kind of freaked him out as a kid. But as I'm watching, I'm thinking, what parts scared you? Because I don't understand what parts would have scared you. This film just felt so trivial to me watching it now.
Well, it's weird that you say that because, we've talked a lot on this podcast about the difference and trying to remove the nostalgia from films, which is always a bit tricky. And this film in particular, I don't think we've ever covered this with a horror thing where we've talked about a film where it's maybe scared or impacted one, but not the other. And I think it was just like it struck at the right time. I think it was like, I'm not easily scared by horror films. I'm not sure if this film terrified me or anything like that, but it got in my head. But it's more from like hearsay, like talking to my friends and stuff. And as you say, with Dave and a lot of other people, it did get into a lot of people's heads back in 97. I think it just hit at that age where, like, for a lot of people, it was different for maybe me and certainly you that we were watching, I don't want to say adult movies, but, 18 rated movies when we were really young. I was already kind of accustomed to watching horror films and Paul Verhoeven films. Like RoboCop, I watched that when I was like 12 years old. Aliens, I watched that when I was like 11, 12 years old. So it wasn't new to me. But for a lot of people, you've got to remember, in my age group, this came out in 97. So they would have been 15, 16. So for a lot of these kids, this would have been maybe one of their first horror films. Certainly a modern horror film. Like people would have seen Nightmare on Elm Street, but even the original Nightmare on Elm Street had aged somewhat by like the mid-90s. So this, I think, just hit hard for a lot of people. And the problem is with a lot of horror films, certainly ones that kind of rely on visuals in particular, a lot of them don't age particularly well. Like, I love the original, to use that example again, Nightmare on Elm Street. I watched it in the cinema a couple of years ago for the first time, and I still like it. It's not scary anymore at all.
We said it last year because we did Nightmare on Elm Street for our first Halloween spectacular last year. And we said, when it gets to the accordion arms of Halloween, it starts to get, not Halloween, Nightmare on Elm Street. The accordion arms as he's running down the alleyway. It starts to get silly, and then it ages it. I want to go back to your point about where you grew up in. It kind of stands to your theory about Rothmine, because Dave it scared Dave, and Dave grew up wrong by you and Rolf as well. So
maybe that's it.
It's the Rolf that, like, you're all pussies back then, I'm guessing.
Well, no, maybe so, but that's the thing, though. People have very different reactions to different styles of horror. And when I think of this film, I mean, you mentioned all the Hellraiser stuff, and there's no escaping the impact of Clive Barker in his visual design. And also, he took a lot from art. I mean, I think it was like a visit to Notre Dame Cathedral, like, incredibly Gothic cathedral that gave him the idea for this film. And they basically put Notre Dame into a computer, deconstructed it, and then reconstructed it as this ship. It doesn't make any sense, but visually it looks like fantastic. And obviously there's like a lot of the stuff where, and I'm going to absolutely slay the names, Hieronymus Bosch, he's a medieval painter of grotesque underworlds, and Peter Bruegel, a Flemish Renaissance painter whose famous work a lot of people will have seen is the Tower of Babel. You can see that impact, but a lot of it is, you can go kind of highfalutin and pick out these kind of, 15th century artists, but really a lot of it looks like Clive Barker. And while that was impactful for a lot of people, the stuff I prefer and the stuff I find creepy is actually the first half of the film. And, to speak to your point, obviously this film didn't work so much for you. I actually think the second half, when it goes full Clive Barker, if we're going to call it that, is less impactful. Obviously the video is quite disturbing. And again, I think maybe you're underestimating the impact of that back in 97. But the first half is a much slower burn and is much closer to something like Alien. And you mentioned there the famous 2-hour cut, which we'll probably never see because so much of the footage is damaged or lost.
Yeah.
But a lot of people are like, oh, well, I want to see the 7-minute gore, horror, rape scene and the extra hell stuff. That stuff isn't the stuff I want to see. To make this a better movie, what I think it actually needs is more breathing space. The pacing is the biggest issue I have with this film. Like you have that really slow build-up. I love the mood. I love the ship, the visual design. You can see the money up on screen. But then once they get on the ship, the descent into madness is almost immediate. There's no, you don't get the kind of knocks on the pipe or anything like that. Immediately, people are seeing weird shit. And not subtle things, really unsubtle. Oh, there's my son with his legs are all fucked up. Someone seeing their friend on fire, all that jazz. And the biggest casualty of this is Sam Neill's character, Weir, who goes insane almost immediately.
He was going insane before he got on the ship, mind.
A little bit. But I would have liked to have seen, I think this film, if you put an extra 20 minutes in this film, I prefer it to be a slower burn there and more character development, because I think the second half gets slightly dopey.
I totally get that. I mean, what's scary about a lot of films is the suspenseful build-up. That's always the scarier part, where it's quiet, but something's coming. But what is coming? I appreciate that, and I'm not trying to take anything away from this film. But as my next point comes up, you said about they took from like Notre Dame and they took from the Tower of Babel and things like that, right? Although all I could think of when I saw the bird's eye view of the ship was it's a fucking shaft, dude, with a belly and 2 balls.
That's exactly what my wife said. Bethan, as soon as she saw the wide shot of the ship, she goes, "It's just a big dick." I was like, "Yeah, but I think it's kind of Notre Dame. They put it in and they reconstruct." She goes, "Yeah, but it looks like a dick." I was like, "It does look like a dick."
It's a massive shaft.
It is.
And what's
a giant dick from hell.
This massive shaft goes through a hole in space.
Yeah.
Like it's penetrating a hole in space.
It tears a hole in space with its giant dick. Yes, it is a giant dick. It's not quite as egregious as the dick pods from Man of Steel, which is still the most dick thing I've ever seen outside of a pornographic movie. But yeah, there's no escaping that. And, the design, I mean, who would ever get on the ship? It is the scariest looking, beyond the fact that it looks like a giant dick. It's so outrageously Gothic. As soon as they get on the ship, they try and half-ass explain why there's a room which looks like a meat grinder, why everything's covered in spikes. Yeah. And of course, everybody plays in to the horror movie tropes. As much as they don't want to believe that, everybody goes following what they see, except for Smitty. I wanted to say,
I love Sean Pertwee in this.
Sean Pertwee is my favorite character in this film. He might be my favorite character in any horror film. I never appreciated it when I was younger, but rewatching it now, I was like, they need a Sean Pertwee in every single film. Some of his lines, it's like when they're having that big conversation and trying to explain what's going on, and it's like, Smitty, have you seen anything unusual at all? No, I haven't seen anything, and I don't need to see anything, sir. But I can tell you this. This ship is fucked. Yeah. It's just, he gets straight to the point. And what was his other line? There is no way that I'm getting on that bastard. It's like, yeah, that's what you should be saying. Like, everyone else is like, kind of trying to get their head around the logistics. He's like, dude, I'm not going on that fucking ship.
Yeah.
Yes, you are taking the right approach. You look at that ship, it's just come through a portal. And again, there's no slow build-up. The first thing you see is blood all over the walls. You're like, no, I prefer to die on this little ship than get on that hell ship. There's just no fucking way.
Which he does, right? Like,
yeah, well, only when he absolutely has to. And it speaks...
No, he dies on the other ship.
He does die on the other ship. And I think it speaks to Sean Pertwee's character where he's just not having any of the ship's bullshit. Because there's all this like, oh, the ship won't allow you to leave. And obviously he does die. But do you notice he's the only one who doesn't have visions? Everyone else has visions. Sean Pertwee, like as soon as he hears something, do you know what he does?
Not all of them, right?
I think they all do. Remember, Cooper has one really early in the film. He's one of the first ones to have
what was
a
his
vision.
He was the one I was thinking didn't have a vision. What was his vision?
He sees the walls are bleeding or something. He's like, oh fuck this! Like he bails. Like he sees weird shit really early in the film.
Okay, yeah.
But I think everyone else has visions. But I'm pretty sure basically all that happens with Smitty is that he hears like a bump on like anything, and he's just like, nope, fuck this. And just the scene would be him hearing one noise and him turning around and fucking off, and just be like, no, fuck this. And that's why I love him, because he's the only one who makes any sense.
Two things to mention. The first one, Smitty, Sean Pertwee's character, is basically Hudson, isn't he, from Aliens?
Yeah, but he doesn't allow himself to he doesn't even engage in things. He doesn't freak out in the same way. He's just like, no, I'm not.
Just his lines being one of the best characters. And secondly, he's the first person you see as you get that wide shot of the Lewis and Clark, then you go through the window, and then you get Smitty pressing the buttons and doing his like pre-flight check. And then that leads to what is meant to be the cool introduction of the cool character. And it is so wrong. So you can hear they're all talking, then you see in the background of the bridge, you can see something moving, and then you can hear Lawrence Fishburne's voice and his cool, deep, I'm an action hero voice. And then you see his face, you're in his face, and he's in his chair, and then it goes to the wide shot, and then it's not cool anymore, dude, because his legs are up like he's taking a shit, and he's turning around super slowly, and it takes everything away. That chair, it's like, and oh my God, you're just watching it and you're thinking, oh, they did him dirty on this.
They absolutely did, because I was thinking the exact same thing. I was like, you know, Lawrence Fishburne, this is like Fled era Lawrence Fishburne kind of thing, where he's badass, but he's also a little bit cheesy, you know, which he had in that kind of mid-90s vibe. But in this, obviously, exactly what you said, he's supposed to be, you know, this cool-ass captain who has, like, total authority, but everyone still loves him. And it's totally undermined by the stupidest things, the chair. Because his legs are just crushed together and he looks like a little lady. And it's just like, I'm not sure if he should have crossed his legs, or, let's be clear, this film wasn't cheap. It cost like $60 million back in 97.
Yeah.
You couldn't afford a better chair? Like, what the fuck? They should have seen that chair and be like, dude, we've got to get another chair.
The introduction would be a proper, like, Star Trek chair, and him walking in cool, holding onto the chair, and then sitting down, maybe giving her a bit of a spin, sitting down, then give her a spin. But the fact that, like, honestly, it just looks like he's killing two birds with one stone. He's arriving on the bridge, and he's taking a big pre-flight dump. Like, it's not great. Insane.
And it's a bit of a shame for him, because he is pretty cool otherwise, but it's one of those like weird issues you pick out with this film. It's like, you know, you mentioned the fact that, you know, nowadays it's not too scary. The thing I automatically pick out is the fact that there are weird things that age this film. You know, it's like, I think it was like, there's a reference at the start of the film, like 2015, a permanent colony on Mars has been established. And of course, we're in 2022. We know that's not happened. But, you know, you do get this in movies. Like if you go back and watch Blade Runner, obviously that's absolutely insane now with the timeline. But it's just like weird analog things. Like, you know, it's not that long ago, but even in 97, they couldn't imagine where we'd be with certain digital aspects of our lifestyle. Like, you know, all the pictures are printed off. The ship's log is on a CD. There's really weird things. Oh, and there's Orbital in the soundtrack. That's another thing that really, like, it's really bizarre, because most of the score and soundtrack is actually really effective by Michael Kamen, who we'll get to in the score soundtrack section, who's popped up on this podcast a whole bunch of times. But for the opening and closing credits, to make it sound more modern, and I'm doing the bunny ears here, they hired, 90s dance group Orbital to add to the soundtrack. And as soon as you hear those opening credits and the closing credits, suddenly you are so painfully aware that you're watching a 90s movie. That and the abundance of CDs.
You're watching a Paul W.S. Anderson movie, because that guy is obsessed with dance soundtracks back then. Just go with Mortal Kombat, what he did in 95.
Yeah, that was badass, though. Mortal Kombat!
But I know we'll talk more about soundtracks, so I don't want to harp on about that too much. But I wanted to go with the names, like Smitty, great name. What was?
I thought you were going somewhere else. I've got a very different issue with names.
I'm gonna get there. Don't worry. Miller, I love the name. Weird, they're all good names. And what the fuck is with Jack Noseworthy's character, Justin? Why is his second name just? It's freaking me out that his second name is a first name.
Justin's lame. Justin's so I've got like a lot of issues with Justin. Not only the fact that his second name is Justin, the fact that his nickname is Baby Ray, which is the fucking lamest.
But before you go into it, the fact he calls Peter's Mama Bear was creepy as fuck.
It is mega creepy because she's like a couple of years older than him. But beyond the fact that he's called Justin, I always just have the issue that to me, he just looks like a young Bon Jovi. Yeah. And I can't get over the fact that, as far as I'm concerned, like John Bon Jovi's been in like one movie, and it was U571, and he was in the same fucking movie. They're like, he looks just like John Bon Jovi. We'll have them both in the same movie. I still have an issue with that to this day. And I don't even like U571, but maybe that's the reason, because they had John Bon Jovi and Justin Mini Bon Jovi. Sorry, I forgot his actual name.
Jack Noseworthy.
Oh, there we go.
And I do have to correct you. John Bon Jovi has been in more than one film. He actually, the one that comes to mind.
Of course you know this. Of course you know this.
He starred. Do you remember John Carpenter's Vampires?
Sadly so, yes.
James Woods.
He wasn't in that.
No, he wasn't in that. It's not a great film, but for some reason it gave us 2 sequels. Yes, I've seen them both.
Wow.
The second one was called Vampires Los Muertos. And that had John Bon Jovi as the lead vampire hunter. Well, what made me laugh, the one thing that sticks out in my mind about that film, is the fact all his vampire gear was in his surfboard. So he would open his surfboard up, and he's got his vampire hunting gear in it.
Oh, kind of like a cross between like is it what was the one with Antonio Banderas where Desperado, where he's got the guitar case with all the guns. Yeah. Oh my God! And just be clear, a little peek behind the curtain here. Obviously, when we're doing this podcast, we do a bit of research beforehand, and we have some vague notes, but we go into this pretty blind in terms of I don't know what you've written down, you don't know what I've written down. This is the first time we've legitimately ever talked about this film. But just give it this wasn't planned. Rob just has that information to mind. You might be the only person who can be like, oh yeah, John Bon Jovi was also in Vampires 2 Los Muertos. So here it is. That's like the most Rob sentence of all time. It's unbelievable.
Although I'll give you something else about Vampires Los Muertos.
Of course you will.
Diego Luna.
Oh really?
Yeah, Diego Luna was in it. I mean, come on, it had to be one of his very first films, but yeah.
That is the thing. I don't watch these films, but every so often, obviously there is some gold to be mined. I think it was like Empire magazine used to do a section on this, where they would have all the kind of, back in the day, direct to DVD bargain bin stuff, and they would pick out the gold amongst it, which I always thought was pretty cool. But fair play to you. You're the one going that extra mile. You're willing to dig into all this crap to find the gold. But
that was my childhood, wasn't it? I was doing that. I was prepping myself. I was doing that for this podcast before I even knew what was going on.
Going that extra mile is unbelievable. But I mean, you mentioned names in this film being, a little bit odd. Yeah. But my big issue, and I've always found it so confusing, especially in terms of the disparity in quality, is the name of the director. Because there's Paul W.S. Anderson, there's Paul Thomas Anderson, and there's Wes Anderson. I end up conflating all three and end up with Paul Wes Anderson, the director of The Big Lebowski or something, all the fucking time. And the problem is Paul W.S. Anderson does not belong in the same conversation as Paul Thomas Anderson and Wes Anderson. I mean, this is a guy who, and again, this is where we're going to disagree, he's had the oddest career, because I actually think he's only made one good movie. Spoiler alert, I think it's this one. And it was his second film. I think you can make an argument that his first movie, and the reason that he got the budget for this film, I mean, this film cost $60 million US. And the reason he got all that money to make basically his own vision was Mortal Kombat. Mortal Kombat came out 2 years earlier in 95 and was a big hit. And he was actually offered X-Men. after Mortal Kombat, but turned it down to make this, and then obviously that wasn't happening again because Event Horizon turned into a pretty big bomb. But you can make an argument Mortal Kombat was silly, cheesy fun. Event Horizon, despite your opinion, I think a lot of people rate it as being pretty good, despite the fact that it was a critical and commercial bomb when it was released.
Oh, it's become a cult classic.
Oh, it's absolutely become a cult classic. But then you look at his other films, it's like, I know you've got a soft spot for Soldier. Soldier is dog. It's so bad. I remember watching that when it came out in, what, 99, 98, 99?
98. It was the film. It was the film just after, like, he went straight from Event Horizon to Soldier. Even took some of the actors with him. He took Jason Isaacs. He took Sean Pertwee. Yeah,
well, that's the thing. Just to be clear, on paper, I'm coming off watching Event Horizon. I love Event Horizon. 13, 14-year-old Liam loved Mortal Kombat. And now suddenly you're making Soldier, a sci-fi action film starring Kurt Russell. I am, just make no mistake, I am on fucking board. I'm expecting to love this film. Even in 98, I was like, this film is so ugly. It is so ugly. And you watch it now, what it reminds me of, it's ugly in the same way that, again, I don't want to pick on Kurt Russell because I love him, but Escape from LA. It's got that same mid-90s ugliness to it. And it's a fucking terrible. I'm sorry, dude. I cannot believe you are here criticizing Event Horizon and shitting on Soldier. But what we've learned in this podcast is that the internet will support you. It always does.
Yeah, we did a poll last week after we argued with this, and I came out on top.
Well, there's obviously a small subsection of the internet, a dark subsection that still likes Soldier. But to get back to my point, I mean, this guy made Alien versus Predator.
Yeah,
not as bad as some people suggest. Certainly after Requiem came out, which proved, Aliens vs Predator actually is pretty good compared to Requiem. Resident Evil, they're nearly all terrible. Death Race, garbage. The Three Musketeers, garbage. Pompeii, garbage. So he's gone on this really weird career path where he started off quite strongly. I mean, even if if we go based on your argument that Soldier's okay, that was still his third film.
Yeah,
and then since then it's gone to shit. But
Soldier as well, Rand. I know it's not the Soldier podcast, but that's a shared universe film with Blade Runner.
Soldier, really?
Yes.
Oh, well, I mean, the fact that it's just been swept under the rug, I mean, it's unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, to come back to that point, I can't think of another director who's had the same kind of trajectory. The only ones I can think of are maybe Neil Marshall, to bring Pertwee back into this, because obviously he was in Dog Soldiers.
Fantastic.
Dog Soldiers is amazing. The Descent is legitimately one of my favorite horror films of all time. But, this is the guy who went on to make Doomsday, that terrible Hellboy remake. And the only other director I could think of, and it's a much smaller pool of films, but you think of like Richard Kelly bursting onto the scene with Donnie Darko and then going on to make Southland Tales and The Box in 2009. Yeah. And he's not been heard of since The Box, although I got to admit, I actually thought The Box was kind of okay.
Which was The Box?
The one with, what's her name? Charlize Theron. Cameron Diaz, where it's like, basically an old dude shows up at their house and he's like, I can give you this deal. Like, if you open the box, you'll become millionaires, but a random person in the world will die. Yeah. Which is actually a really interesting premise. I thought that one was okay.
Another one where we differ. I didn't mind the remake of Hellboy.
Oh, really? I tried it. I watched 20 minutes of it and I thought it was all right.
I mean,
I really didn't like the cast.
I give too much leeway to, how am I going to forget his name all of a sudden? Hopper.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he was okay as Hellboy. I just didn't like, again, visually, I didn't like it in the style. But you understand, my point, like those, Neil Marshall in particular.
David Harbour, sorry. Yeah.
Like, Dog Soldiers and The Descent, man. Like, talk about 1, 2. Those were so good. And then it's just like, it just fell off. I know, in fairness, he's directed episodes of Game of Thrones and stuff like that. But yeah, like I said, I think
he did one called, what was it called? Centurion, I think, with Michael.
That was it was okay.
I wasn't.
No, I wasn't a massive fan. It wasn't a massive fan. But yeah, Event Horizon's got this weird place in history because it cost, what was it, 60 million production. That's the production budget.
Yeah. And
it only grossed 26 million in the US, 42 global. Like, it was a bomb. But it's one of these films that's just picked up in popularity. And it's had, I would argue, the problem with sci-fi is that it usually goes one of two directions. It either looks like Ridley Scott's Alien, like, that's kind of like, the worn out vision of the future. It's just the danger is you're always going to look like Alien. Or you go to the other extreme and everything looks white and clean.
Or you get space truckers.
Or you get space truckers. Again, the only person to bring up space truckers. But this, at least, has a very unique visual design, certainly in sci-fi anyway. And I know it has a lot to answer for with Clive Barker and stuff, but it's had an impact on popular culture. Like you see it, especially in video games. I mean, Dead Space being the obvious one. But that visual design, I feel like there's like maybe 3 or 4 looks to kind of sci-fi. And whether like it or, love it or hate it, Event Horizon is one of those looks. There's the alien look, there's the Event Horizon look, and there's like the shiny white look. And of course, there's the Space Trackers look. So we'll give you that one. But
you said about the pacing as well. Mm-hmm. You could definitely feel it. Not so much at the beginning. I appreciate it. Like, I know you said you wanted more of that, but I appreciated the whole mystery thing as we're getting towards the ship. And I do love these films. Whoever they speak to about, like, give me some science about how we could travel through time. And we got this anti-grav machine. Yeah. Like, I love all that stuff. How minds come up with that is fantastic. But then all of a sudden, when Weir comes onto the ship and he's just being the biggest dick in the world. I saw this. No, you didn't see that. Trust me. It was something. Even though he's seeing his no-eyed misses running around the ship. The pacing then just went nuts, because then all of a sudden, the next time you see him, he's eyeless, flying the ship, and then he blows up. And then the next time you see him after that, then he is full-on Pinhead. And then all of a sudden, he's dead again. Like, it went so quick. He's meant to be the driving force. He's the ship's avatar. Like, the ship won't let me die. We're going to go back to hell. You're its new crew, blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. And then all of a sudden, it just went so quick. And it was like, oh my God, like, how the fuck did that happen? The other thing I said as well about the science in this, people may disagree with me, but as soon as Baby Bear, when he went into space.
The airlock.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Dude should have died. There is no way he's blowing air out, and then Lawrence.
There have been other examples, and again, I'm not sure about the science behind this, but science fiction is awash with great airlock scenes, and again, because of the special effects having aged a bit, maybe this doesn't look as good as it used to. Back in '97, that was a fucked up scene. Like, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Like, the thought of suddenly being in an airlock and his eyes bleeding, like, that was so impactful in '97. And there are other examples of people kind of surviving in the vacuum of space. And I'm sure I've seen other films, like, you can survive theoretically for like 20 seconds. The only thing that's weird is that he's not cold when he goes back on the ship. That's the one thing he definitively should be. But I adore that scene. I think that scene is so... It works as an action scene. It works as a horror scene. It works as a sci-fi scene. It is one of my... Like, of the more gruesome stuff in the film, that's my favorite bit. And I think that, like, to speak to your point about the pacing, I absolutely agree with everything you said. And, like, Weir, I think his character on paper works because, as you say, it was a great turn of phrase used there, the avatar for the ship. That is exactly what he is. And it's like he gets on the ship and he doesn't, even though he's seeing fucked up stuff, he's a scientist. And obviously he's got this attachment to it's, he created the ship. He wants it to work for his legacy or whatever. And the problem is they don't play up to that. As you say, like, there should have been that 20 minutes of him struggling, with that kind of balance of, like, the weird shit I'm seeing, what's happening around me, and his kind of inner turmoil of wanting the ship to work and wanting to get it back and it not to be an absolute shitstorm. But instead, it's like 1 minute he's like, oh, maybe the ship's okay. And then the next thing you know, he's not missing eyes. And that was one of my big questions actually about the end of the film, is because he dies, he goes through the airlock. When he comes back, do you think that's actually Weir, or do you think that's just the ship presenting Weir? In the same way that the ship can, 2 minutes earlier, Lawrence Fishburne had seen his friend be on fire and he's shooting fireballs at him, which looked kind of dumb, one of my least favorite bits of the film. But then all of a sudden, Weir, who's clearly been shot not out of the airlock, out of the window, is suddenly appearing, and not only reappears, but he's got his eyes back. He's Pinhead, as you say, without the pins. And I was saying, like, I'm not sure if this actually is Weir or this is the ship projecting the image of Weir, because that's kind of Lawrence Fishburne's, like, nightmare in that moment. Yeah. That's all I could think.
So I'm not too sure if it's because it's Lawrence Fishburne's nightmare, but you are right. I mean, maybe it is just because everything is real. It's not just, as Lawrence Fishburne said, it's not that it's in our minds, it's happening.
The ship makes it real.
Yeah, like Burning Man has turned into Flamethrower all of a sudden.
Yeah. So dumb.
Yeah, and that's what I mean. So maybe Weir's gone. Weir's out there floating around. He's
dead.
He's an icicle at this point.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you've got you've got the ship going, right, this is I can now make Weir.
Yeah. It's just that kind of visual representation of evil in that moment. And, again, sorry to come back to the pacing again, but we've mentioned the fact that obviously you're not too fussed in this film. And, you weren't alone, certainly back in 97, because this film got famously poor reviews. And I think a lot of people shared, I guess, my opinion on it now, as it were, is that I think a lot of people saw it as a slightly wasted opportunity in terms of being style over substance, in so much that, this movie starts, and once you get over that orbital soundtrack and the opening credits, what it really is basically trying to do, certainly for the first 30, 40 minutes, is be The Shining in space. And that's, again, to come back to the Weir thing, if you'd really leaned into that of him having a mental breakdown on the ship, I think you really could have gone somewhere interesting. But then it just kind of goes, all right, we're abandoning that and we're just going to have full-on gore. It's like they almost thought, we've got something special with this kind of 7-minute clip of everybody's eyes falling out and everyone having an orgy in the corner. Supposedly an actually real orgy with porn stars.
Yeah, that's in my facts.
We'll get round to that.
Porn stars and amputees.
Yeah, I know. And that is the thing. I mean, I know you say it didn't impact you, but it's still pretty gross. And there's one of the most genius choices in this film is the use of Latin, because it's just creepier. It's like they're playing, that's when I would have just bounced. I would have just got on the other ship and taken my chances. Before, one of the weirdest things is, when they get to the ship, nobody's had an email, nobody's had a kind of heads up of why they're there. And the first thing they hear is that recording, which Weir is totally chilled about, where it just sounds like the sounds of hell. Yeah. And then you get what's his name? Oscar Isaac. Jason Isaac, sorry, Oscar Isaac. Jason Isaacs saying, I can hear that. They hadn't run it through a computer before, but as soon as he's Liberate me, save me, I'm like, fuck, I'm doing the Smitty thing. I'm like, fuck this, I am out. But the fact, just one, the idea that nobody would have run that through a computer before they showed up. And two, you've got to think this ship is probably one of the most important ships ever created. This one with, it's jumped across the universe and reappeared 7 years later. All they send is the creator of the ship. That ship must be worth billions. They don't send anyone else. And not only that, they send a ship of just anybody's. It's not quite Armageddon in terms of sending a bunch of drillers to save the world, but it's not a million miles off either.
But to be fair, I'm actually going to defend it on this one, because it's hush-hush, because it was considered the world's greatest space disaster.
Yeah.
They don't want to get hopes up. They don't want to say, because there'll be so many questions they can't answer. So they're sending a recon first. I appreciate that. And the best person to send is the guy that created the ship. You don't know that this guy's a fucking lunatic. Okay, I understand that. It turns out that they're actually a rescue team. These guys. That's what they do. They are a rescue team. So so it's not that you just send Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck to go and
like you said, it's not that bad.
They are rescue guys. They all have their specific job to do. And I appreciate that, and they're all pissed off because they're meant to be on some downtime, and it has to happen. I will defend the film for that choice. And obviously, if you start sending a whole armada, the film is over.
Not the whole armada. I just think for that you would send more than just Weir.
Yeah.
I totally take your point. Maybe I haven't got so much of an issue with the rescue team going. I just feel like they would have sent a couple more suits. Yeah. And that's all.
Fair, maybe they did. Maybe they knew exactly what they were doing. Maybe they did run that through some sort of algorithm, but they're starting to think that, as you say, well, this.
Maybe they just kept it hush-hush. It's dude, that's gonna freak people out.
Let's send some cannon fodder. Let's just figure out what's going on.
Yeah, they won't know Latin. Well, they didn't account for DJ, did they, in his Latin skills?
You said about acting choices, right? And you said choices in this film. And I'm glad you mentioned DJ, because whatever choice Jason Isaacs made to do whatever fucking accent he was doing, I couldn't figure it out. He sounded Welsh at one point. He sounded Irish. What the fucking accent was he doing?
Yeah, was he just trying to be kind of elusive and detached, but instead he just sounds like he's from everywhere?
Because what they were trying to do, because you could see it on their badges. I got it in fact, because they're set in the future. Like they're meant to be from the UK, but his Union Jack badge kind of has stars on it, because obviously they've been.
They're part of it's basically the opposite of Brexit in the future.
So maybe because 2054 their accents have merged. But I don't know what he was doing.
I don't think he was thinking that far ahead. I just think he's gone for something, and it's just been a bit. I think he's quite good in this film.
He is good.
And he offers something different as being he's almost, in any other sci-fi film, he would be the secret droid. He would totally be a droid.
Or he's the guy that doesn't want to let it go. We're going to leave, and we can't leave. This is a scientific.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, he'd be a droid, or he'd be what's his name? From Aliens. Fuck. The suit.
Burke.
We both got at the same time. You know, he'd be one of those characters. But instead, he dies pretty gruesomely in this film. Although another one of the, you know, a very literal pacing issue in terms of the time between him getting killed by Weir and it feels like 2 seconds later, he is tied to the ceiling with chains and his body's been completely cut to shreds. I'm like, how long did he have to do that?
Well, no, that's because Weir is now Pinhead, and Pinhead controls those fucking chains.
It is, yeah. And maybe that's why I don't like the second, because I don't particularly like the Hellraiser films. I tried to watch the new Hellraiser film recently, and it took 20 minutes for me to remind myself that I don't like that style of horror. Like, I like, you know, I don't mind gore and stuff like that and slasher flicks, but that stuff is it's a masochistic style of horror, which I've never been a fan of. There's no fun in the kills. It's gruesome for the sake of gruesomeness.
I've never been a huge fan of it, and I appreciate because the whole point of the Hellraiser films, kind of like this one, is pain and pleasure. The thing. Yeah, that's what I mean. I mean, whilst I'm having sex, please don't punch me in the face. I'm not that kind of person.
I'm not. I'm just not that kind of guy. There's two styles of horror I'm not first on, and it's not because, like I said, I have no issues with gore. I just don't particularly enjoy them.
Yeah,
it's that, and I never got into the Saw films because, again, they just felt relentlessly nasty, which I'm not so much of a fan of.
The Saw
gore porn.
Gore or torture porn.
Exactly. I'm not a fan of torture porn, gore porn.
I wasn't a huge fan of the Saw films either. Like, they're not for me. And I haven't seen all the Hellraisers. I saw the original. I
tried watching the original quite recently.
Kind of enjoyed it. I saw the remake. The remake is all right, but the problem that the remake has with any remake you get these days is they're trying to make it more. They're trying to make it cool, and it just doesn't work. And even the look of the Cenobites.
Cenobites, yeah.
Well, the Cenobites in the original films, they all seem to wear these like metal armor things, from what I can remember. And in this one, it's basically they're all just like skin that's been moved around. And, And no, it was all right.
Well, again, we talked about at the top of the podcast, like the different styles of horror. And, you know, we've had it a few times when we went to see Smile. Last weekend?
My wife wants to see that, yeah.
And my wife found it very impactful because, basically, it's a lot of jump scares and it's just loud noises. It's trying to pretend that it's this highfalutin horror film. It's not. It's just an array of jump scares. And once I kind of get into my head that is what they're going for, it stops being impactful because instead I'm watching it, I'm like, this is where it's either going to be the jump here or it's going to be a bluff and there'll be a jump in a second. And it doesn't have. And by the end of the film, I was quite bored. And similarly, with films like the second half of Event Horizon, when it's just gross and going for body horror, I can get quite bored. It's always the start when it's a slow build and they put the idea in your head and let you build it. That's like I mentioned before, Hereditary, like that totally got in my head. Even something like, you know, I know the series has gone off the rails quite recently, or over the last decade or so, but Paranormal Activity, the first one, or you know, these films which kind of like basically show you very little and then just let you fill in the gaps, because the reality of what they show you is never as scary. A perfect example encapsulated in a single film is Jeepers Creepers. The first half of Jeepers Creepers is super effective, and then the second half they show you the monster, and you're like, it's just when it was just an unknown entity in a truck.
It was scary.
Yeah,
the scariest thing about Jeepers Creepers is the director.
Oh yeah. Totally.
He's a bad man. He
is a bad man for sure.
Yeah, just Wikipedia Victor Salva. For me, in horror, I'm not a huge fan of horror. Like, horror wouldn't be the film that and it's not because I'm scared, and I'm not trying to act macho here, but I don't jump a lot during films. I will sit there and I will watch films with my wife, with friends, and they'll jump, and I'll just look at them and go, really? At that point? Like,
I mean, I get it, but it's just, I guess it just depends how you watch movies.
I don't do jump scares. I don't do, like you say, the gore. I watch the films for the merits of the film. I'm not a huge fan of horror, because to me, horror is like comedy. They're okay the first time, but they don't have any rewatchability.
There is diminishing returns for sure.
The scares have got everything like that, so they're not for me. The best kind of horrors I like are probably the slasher films. Because you've got somebody chasing you, you've got all these things about, there's some sort of monster running, like there's something in the dark. I don't get that. But when you look at and I haven't seen it yet, but Halloween Ends is meant to actually be quite good.
Yeah, well, it's like its predecessor. It's had incredibly, incredibly mixed reviews. It absolutely depends on which, because I think it's actually saying, like Metacritic, it's like 40 something. So
Wow.
on normal standards, that's pretty bad. But again, like Halloween Kills before it, the people who like it seem to really like it, and the people who don't like it absolutely hate it. And I watched Halloween Kills. I'm going to watch Halloween Ends hopefully later today.
Yeah, we're going to.
Because of the questionable reviews, I just didn't get around to Halloween Kills, and I watched it yesterday, and I was like, I actually quite like it. I understand why people don't like it, because it is swinging for the fences, and not everything lands, especially with the thematic stuff. But again, I like the fact that it's trying to do something different.
The problem with Halloween Kills,
horror movies are maybe the closest thing in cinema to music, in that it's so personal in terms of what has an impact on you.
The problem that you had with Halloween Kills is the fact that it did nothing. It was basically, Halloween Kills should have been the last 10 minutes of the first Halloween.
Yeah, I know what you mean, but it still had cool kills, and I liked the idea.
It's I don't know. It's like,
no, I mean, I get why you're upset, because it doesn't build on the narrative that was established. Basically, it does something different, where it's like, we're going to, because let's be clear, it basically parks Laurie Stroud, parks the narrative largely, and says what kind of impact. It's basically a critique of American culture at the time, of mob culture. That's what it really is. So I get, like, people will be, as soon as you start going slightly political, people start getting their backs up anyway. It's the closest thing we'll probably get to Halloween 3, but with Michael Myers in it, where it almost feels like they're putting everything aside and just making something quite... It's not obviously Halloween 3, because that is totally unique in the realms of, certainly in terms of the Halloween saga. But I like the fact that it tried something different.
And that's what I'm saying. I like that. And I'm not denying it. The whole film, though, was just the last 10 minutes of the first Halloween, 2019's Halloween. Yeah. Extended. And I'm not saying that's a problem, because I like that Halloween. You had Michael Myers returning, you had him killing people, great. Then you have Halloween Kills, which is basically the mob are going to go after Michael now. And then, he gets his comeuppance. And then, from what I can, they're doing something different each one, because Halloween Ends then seems to be less about Michael Myers and more about maybe a new killer, from what I can gather. So,
well, I mean, we'll find, we can maybe talk about that.
It's not just the same, like fucking Friday the 13th, 27, where it's basically just Jason Voorhees again. I like the fact
space.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I like that one.
Yeah, I thought you might.
Yeah, it's like Leprechaun 4 in space. That was good.
It's trying to do something different, which I appreciate, and that is maybe the biggest problem with. I don't know. When I come bring it back to Event Horizon, I think the reason I think it still works is that, despite its faults, and it does have its faults, is that it does kind of have a bit of both of those worlds, in so much that the first half does feel like a cross between Aliens and The Shining, and then the second half feels like this gore body horror movie. And I don't think it ever merges those two worlds quite as perfectly as I would hope, certainly. And maybe the longer cut would have achieved this, because it is, 96 minutes instead of the projected 2-hour cut. So we're talking about a lot of footage here.
I'll give it to you, though, right? Event Horizon is one of the better horrors from in space. I mean,
100%.
Because that's a tough genre to have. The whole thing about space is it's meant to be solitary. So that is quite scary.
And well, the biggest problem you always have as well is that it's so hard for something not to feel like, as soon as you make it in, and I know this isn't a monster movie because it's more conceptual than this, like the ship is the monster, I suppose. Yeah. But as soon as you do kind of like people on a ship in space horror, 9 times out of 10 you're like, well, it's just Alien. It's just Alien. Yeah, and this film does differentiate itself.
If you look at it, like, I'm not going to go through a lot of horror in space ones, but you get like Event Horizon, you get Leprechaun 4 in space, you get Jason
Critters 3.
Was it Critters? It was Critters 4.
Critters 4, sorry.
Critters 3 had Leonardo DiCaprio. The fact I know
amazing.
Yeah, and then you get like the good ones. Then, like, I say good ones, the ones that Pandorum. That had a decent premise. It just wasn't that good.
I mean, unsurprisingly, I think Paul W.S. Anderson was an executive producer on Pandorum. And I remember I was really excited about that, because when I saw the trailers, I really liked the cast. And the aesthetic totally reminded me of Event Horizon. And obviously we hadn't had a film like that in quite a while. And then I watched the film and I was like, this just reminds me that Event Horizon's a really good film. Because Pandorum is basically just a not so good version of Event Horizon as far as I'm
Speaking of John Carpenter as well, Ghosts of Mars.
Oh man, that film is rough.
Terrible,
again, you talk about a director with a weird track record, so many classics, and then just at some point it just goes off the rails. But I don't. I mean, the thing is, I was going to say we need to wrap this up, but I'm amazed we haven't talked about like the comedy value, because the thing is, this film isn't very funny for the most part outside of Smitty, but there is it Cooper? Is that who gets a lot of the? I think this film probably could have done with a touch more Cooper, because I know in 2022. Cooper. I think a little, like, don't get me wrong, when I say more Cooper, I don't mean him being kind of slightly sexually uncomfortable with
Stark.
What's the name? Stark.
That's pissed me off how they spelt her name, mind. Why does Stark need a C and a K at the end of her name?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird thing for sure. But yeah, Cooper, other than that, like, I quite like the stuff at the end of the film because it's getting so grim. But when he gets kind of like blasted away from the ship and his line is like, where the fuck am I going? Like, I like that. Yeah, sure. It doesn't really make any sense that he makes his way back to the ship and all that jazz. But sometimes, especially towards the end, I'm like, because again, maybe I'm not such a fan of that Clive Barker style body horror. I'm like, it could have done with a bit more levity.
I'm assuming,
obviously, you disagree with Cooper.
I like the whole comedy aspect of it. It just it didn't work for me. Like the whole thing about Cooper being, you look at Cooper and you go, well, Cooper's gonna die, and then no, he doesn't. But Cooper does.
that sounds like, well, he's black, he's gonna die. Doesn't that happen in horror films? I know. That
kind of character is the character that should die. But okay.
Usually does. Yeah,
we're going to subvert the genre and we're going to say, no, he survives. But
he and Stark, isn't it?
Yeah, he is.
It's such a weird selection of people to survive.
Because Stark basically doesn't do anything. And then Cooper is just like, it's like a calamity of errors with that guy. And
the one thing it does as well is like it paints itself into a crowd. Like you're not getting as like, say this film had been a massive hit, say it'd been huge, yeah? And then you look at the end of the film and you're like, wait, who survived? Stark, Cooper, and fucking DJ. You're not making a sequel with those three as the leads.
I thought it was...
no, not DJ. Sorry, he got cut to shreds. It was Justin. That's even worse. Justin sucks ass. Justin should have died the moment he put his hand in that goop. Like, that drove me up the wall. What's he doing putting his hand in the evil dark goop?
Mate, it's horror.
I know. They do it in fucking Prometheus, where they go look at the little... what are these evil fucking horrible snake things? I'll go stick my face in it.
That's the problem that we have, right? We watch these films and we go, right, why are you going upstairs on your own? Hellraiser did it. A secret door opened in a wall. The fucking woman went in there earlier. And then I said to my wife, I said, why is she going in there? But then I thought to myself...
You have very interesting conversations with your wife. Why is she going in there?
Sorry, I was thinking two conversations ahead.
I know.
Why is she going in there? I went to bed the other night. The cat was already asleep. The kid was already asleep. I was just drifting off and I heard a massive bang. Now, logic would dictate that I grab my family and I just leave. But I actually went to investigate the bang.
Well, that's the thing. That's why Smitty's so great in this film. He's the only one just going, fuck this, I'm out. Like, I know they do that thing at the end of the film where, the fucking gravity drive thing gets in their heads and that's why she goes, like, looking after her kid. But as soon as she started, like, wandering after her kid in the space ducks, I was like, she has to die. She has to die. But that's part of the fun. Like,
why is your kid in space, love? Use your fucking head. Your kid is at home.
I know. But that is part of the fun of horror films. I know you say you're not as big a fan of the genre, but and I think I've mentioned this before, it's the only genre of cinema that I can enjoy a truly shit film, because you can just, it's quite fun picking it apart, as you say, sitting on the sofa and going, what the fuck why are you doing this? And that was, again, I'm not going to start talking too much about Halloween, but obviously Halloween Kills, we're talking about a pretty talented director there and they're trying to do something interesting. It's still totally reliant upon people doing really, really dumb things. And that is a problem you'll always have with the genre. Otherwise, if you've got like a whole ship of Smitties, nobody goes on the Event Horizon. Or as soon as they get on, they're like, fuck this, I'm out. Well, but of course, the horror, it wouldn't work as a movie.
You mean a whole ship of logical thinkers?
Exactly.
You said horror is the one genre you can have, you can appreciate a shitty film. For me, it's action. Like I can.
That would be number two.
I can watch a shit action film all day as long as there's some decent since you've got action in there.
I used to be like that when I was younger, but I find myself now being a lot more critical. Like any kind of like big budget like film, like especially an action film, I'd go see them all at the cinema because I'm like, oh, you know, it's just going to be a spectacle and stuff. But I've become a lot more picky as I've got older. But with horror film, yes, I'll watch some real dog shit. In terms
We've
of
been
horror.
talking about this for like an hour, and we've
Let's wrap this up.
In the hour we've talked, I think we mentioned Event Horizon for 20 minutes.
I know. It's almost become the Halloween podcast. So in terms of love and hate, I've got love the visuals. I mean, the setting, the ship itself. I know some of the CG is aged slightly. Luckily, because they had the budget, the vast majority was actually created. So all that stuff is aged brilliantly well. Sure, the ship makes no sense from an actual scientific or technical perspective, but from a visual perspective, like style over substance, sure, but it's stylish as fuck. The creepy use of Latin, again, if he just reads out "save me," it's not that impactful. As soon as he reads "Liberate me," you're like, oh man, that just makes it creepier, even though the guy's like removing his eyes. And I know we picked out some of them as having an issue, but the cast, one of the major issues you often have with films like this, are that the cast become forgettable. You know, for better and for worse, what the cast are. Even Justin, Baby Bear, he's a complete tool, but he's memorable. Like you remember every single member of the cast on the ship, and that is a rare thing to have in this film. In a film of this ilk, sorry.
I love. I've already mentioned it, but I love the science behind it. The whole explanation about the gravity drive and how it's working. And everything. I love that.
Do you know what else I love about that? And sorry to butt in quickly. Is that, and you mentioned the fact that this is a rescue team. So when he's describing the gravity drive, and obviously he's doing it in layman's terms because they're like, we don't know what you're saying. And what they're really saying is explain it for the audience.
Yeah.
It's like if you're watching a film, like I rewatched Interstellar recently. And of course, you've got 3 NASA scientists all at the top of their field, but they need to explain these themes for the audience. So you have these like NASA geniuses going, oh, I don't understand black holes. But of course you fucking would if you were on that ship. But yeah, what can you do?
CSI. It's CSI where one CSI is talking to another CSI agent. He goes, oh, I used a macro spectrometer. And what that does is it does this. But you're like, dude, they both went to the same fucking class.
Exactly. It's like everybody. If you've got like a room full of geniuses, for the movie to work, somebody has to act like an idiot.
You need that
every
dumbass.
other scene.
Yeah.
You need a dumbass to be like, oh, what? I don't understand. Oh, don't worry. We'll explain for the audience now. So yeah, sorry to butt in there.
No, it's fine. So I love the science behind it. I love Smitty. Sean Pertwee. I mean, that dude should never try and do any other accent. He just needs to keep his accent in any film he does
100%.
Because he's just fantastic in pretty much anything he does. He's wicked. I love Sean.
Oh, so many of his lines are fantastic. I really should have had him in Love as well, to be honest. He's fantastic.
And to be fair, I love / like, I guess, because it has aged, but not dramatically bad.
Mm-hmm.
The whole CG, like, all right,
the CG's aged.
When you see the CG inside the shaft of the ship, that's bad. But what, like the whole when it goes around the Lewis and Clark at the beginning, it's going, that looks great.
That looks okay, yeah.
So for me, they're my 3.
It's basically because it was 1997 and it was still that era of show off visuals. Basically, it was like putting the money on the screen. It's weird because the stuff like when you have like just random items floating in the shaft. Back in 97, that was like a big dick move. Like, sorry to keep using that analogy, but that's what it was. It was like, oh, check it out. We've got money. We've got CG.
Yeah.
Because in 97, that would have looked amazing. But of course, the weird thing is now that's the stuff that ages the film, and it's the practical effects which make it look modern. So it's just one of those things.
Yeah. What he hates?
The second half doesn't quite live up to the promise of the first half. The increased reliance on gore and emphasis on visuals rather than psychological horror. That's, we've talked about that a bunch of times, but that's my real issue with the film. And the fact that back in when I was, 15, 16, I just got my first job, it made me scared of the quick save stockroom. Not terrified, but the stockroom used to legitimately look like the inside of the Event Horizon. It was just dark and creepy as fuck, and I just watched Event Horizon, and I tried to act all cool about it because I was like basically the only person in the store on a Sunday other than the person working the till. And I was like, this is still pretty creepy. And like I said, I like to think like horror films and stuff don't get into my head, but in that particular situation, it definitely did. But in my defense, I was 15 at the time. What's that?
Was that the one on Newport Road?
No, Albany Road.
Oh, fuck me, there was a quick save on Albany Road.
There used to be a quick save. Yeah, like people would be like, what the fuck's happening here? But I think like Peacocks is there now or some shit like that.
Okay.
But it used to be a pretty big quick save, and on a Sunday they would I was the only person working the floor, the only person. And I said when I went up to the stockroom upstairs, I suddenly realised I was a long way away from the other person working on the store who was on the tills. I really should have seen the fact that the store was going out of business when there were only 2 people working there on Sunday for a pretty big store. But I remember, you go up in a crusty ass old lift, again very Event Horizon, very Alien. You open the door and there's pipes everywhere and stuff. I'm like, oh my god, man, this looks like the fucking movie, dude. So yeah, it did have an impact back in '97, that's for sure.
I mean, to be fair, that's not too bad though. If it stuck with you for reasons like that, that's a sign of a good movie to you.
It is the sign of a good movie, but at the time, at least, I was quite annoyed that it was scaring me a little bit, or at least freaking me out. Let's put it that way.
So for me, hates Lawrence Fishburne's fucking chair. That introduction.
Your ones are much better than mine. You're absolutely right. The chair's the worst.
I couldn't get over it. It was pointless.
It wasn't pointless. No, they needed a chair. It was just the worst chair.
I appreciate on paper that looks great. He's arriving onto the bridge via a rail, via a Picatinny rail.
Absolutely fine.
Yeah.
You just need everything about it is fine. The chair just needs to be wider. That is it. That is it. So he doesn't look like he's crammed in like a little fit. I don't know. It's bad.
Sam Neill as Weir. I thought that whole character was a bit shit, to be fair.
Really? I think there's a great character in there. I love Sam Neill.
I love Sam Neill. I'm not taking it away from Sam Neill. I love Sam Neill.
Some of his line deliveries are great as well. I mean, the one used at the top, the most famous one, where we're going, you won't need eyes to see. He suddenly gets very Shakespearean in that line. And it's also totally misquoted. Well, not misquoted. That's wrong, because it just gets shortened. Like, whenever I say it, whenever I think about it, I just say, where we're going, we won't need eyes. Yeah. But it's actually, we won't need eyes to see. And I'm just like, all right, fair enough. But yeah,
I guess grasping at straws a little bit. Not the whole...
just the movie.
I should say Justin as a surname pisses me off, but I'm not going to say that. The whole fact that this film should have just been called Hellraiser 7 Event Horizon. I appreciate Hellraiser was a big influence. I've got it in facts that Hellraiser was a big influence. But fuck me, Hellraiser was the influence. It was literally just Hellraiser.
No, it's different because those Cenobites, they're literally from hell, whereas
this is more a hell dimension.
A hell dimension, which is really what this is. I don't think it really went to hell. It went to a different dimension, which we think of as being hell. I mean, what's one of the famous quotes in the film? Hell is only a word. The reality is much, much worse. Yeah. I think that is the thing. It's not actually hell. It's just I think they even say at some point, it's just an evil dimension kind of thing, a dimension of chaos.
The gravity drive opened another dimension.
Yeah. But what I do like about it, and again, it's almost a shame that they went the full Clive Barker thing, is that they could have gone in any direction. I like the concept that the ship is basically creating your own nightmares. Yeah. So you could visually or conceivably go in any direction you see fit. But instead, they just kind of go chains and kind of scars and stuff. But yeah. It's a bit of a shame, but whatever.
Right,
but whatever. Sorry, that was very dismissive. I do apologize.
Yeah, for a film I like and I chose, whatever.
Yeah. Whatever. Fucking dick. Facts. I've got just a couple before you get onto your list. I mean, we've already mentioned the Bloody Orgy video, as it's now known, was much longer. It was actually not. I don't even think it was filmed by Paul W.S. Andreson. I think it was because he was filming other scenes. The second unit director.
No, it was shot by him and Vadim Jean.
Yeah. But I think you mentioned earlier, real life amputees were used for special effects scenes where they were mutilated. There was actually porn actors and actresses for real sex stuff, as it were. So It is a pretty disturbing section. But one of the more interesting facts was that many consider Event Horizon to be an unofficial prequel to Warhammer 40,000. Yeah. When humankind discovers the warp and learns of its dangers the hard way and all that jazz. But the screenwriter, is it Philip Eisner? He acknowledged that at least Warhammer 40,000 was a massive influence, if not an official sequel to Event Horizon. But I thought that was quite an interesting.
And that's the same thing again, isn't it, with Soldier? The fact that it's meant to be a shared universe with Blade Runner seems.
Yeah. It's such a bizarre thing, a crossover with Warhammer 40,000. Yeah, and I went the last
wagon to anything really. I think.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I'm not going to steal the next one. You mentioned it earlier. The flags. That was another big one, wasn't it?
Go for it. Go for it.
You mentioned the United States has 55 stars on it instead of the usual 50 or whatever it is. The Australian flag lacks the British flag and instead has an Aboriginal flag. And instead of a British Union Jack, there's a Union kind of style flag, Jack, whatever you want to call it, which kind of hints at, again, the opposite of Brexit, that they've joined the European Union, but in a more committed way. The only one I find weird is Lawrence Fishburne's character, Miller. It looks like he has a Belgian flag around his neck, which he keeps grabbing, and I just didn't really get what the score was with that. At the end, he makes a very clear thing. Like when he's trying to get his head together, he grabs it, almost like somebody would grab a crucifix, but it's a fucking Belgian flag.
I wonder if that was the flag of the guy he let die.
Oh, maybe his friend didn't sound very Belgian, in fairness, but he was on fire. So
but he's the ship's manifestation. Maybe
of course. Maybe you could only do American accents. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe it just doesn't sound. And which accent you're going to go for? There's so many with Belgium. I don't know. But yeah, that's all I've got for facts anyway.
Cool. So for me, at around 5 minutes, the rotational shot of the space station, which was one of my loves, over the Earth, took nearly a third of the film's visual effects budget.
Awesome. It was worth it. Awesome scene.
Great, yeah.
You had to see that giant space stick.
The script originally described the Gateway machine as a smooth and featureless black orb, 10 meters in diameter, suspended in midair between large rotating mechanical arms. It also was said to contain a stable black hole within it at all times, which the ship was used as a power source, as opposed to briefly creating a temporary one. Paul Anderson decided to redesign it to involve interlocking circles as an homage to the puzzle box in Hellraiser.
Oh, there it is. Do you think, I'm not sure how the release dates work out, but maybe it would have looked too much like The Sphere. You know, the Dustin Hoffman film?
That was 98, 97, something like that?
Dude, it'll be right around the same time.
That was set in a deep sea, though, wasn't it?
Yeah, but you know what I mean? From a visual perspective, if they had just gone with like the Sphere thing, kind of hanging up in the air, it would have looked a lot... Sphere was 98. Yeah,
but it was being filmed at the time, so maybe...
Maybe. But yeah, I mean, the Clive Barker thing makes sense.
The spacesuits worn by the actors weighed 65 pounds. Lawrence Fishburne nicknamed his Doris due to the weight. I wonder if Doris was a big girl then. I think.
I know, right?
Standing upright in them for longer periods could lead to back injury, but you couldn't sit down because of the backpack. So they had to get special... Everything is fucking phallic in this film. They had to get special hanging poles so the actors could rest on them between takes. So they were just basically leaning on poles.
Yeah. There's a lot of that going on.
Although the film met with mostly negative reviews and a disappointing box office result, it's amassed a considerable cult following over the years. Director Paul Anderson said that the movie's cult status was predicted to him years before by Kurt Russell. Anderson screened Event Horizon before they started work on Soldier, and Russell said, "Forget about what this movie's doing now. In 15 years' time, this is going to be the movie you're glad you made."
What, Soldier?
No,
I was going to say, I don't think he's glad he made Soldier. But yeah, I mean, if anyone knows about that, Jesus Christ, it's Kurt Russell. Like, it's a perfect example. This dude made The Thing absolutely tanked. Big Trouble in Little China absolutely tanked. Yeah. And those are two of the most beloved, kind of cult movies of the last 40 years. You can imagine the films that kind of like came into the cinema and did well ahead of them. Like, few of those would have lived in the memory. I'm sure someone would be like, well, E.T. was #1 this week. Yes, that has lived on the memory. But The Thing and Big Trouble in particular, they totally tanked, and they are adored now. I don't think Event Horizon is adored in quite the same way, but it's like you say, it's got a massive cult following, that's for sure.
Yeah. You mentioned the Aboriginal flag replacing the Union Jack. Mm-hmm. That was Sam Neill's idea. Sam Neill
really?
Because he thought in 2047 that's what it should be. So
yeah. That's pretty cool. Well, I like all that stuff, like visual storytelling. Yeah. Just kind of subtle, is like give you an idea of where the world or where Earth is. You never see the Earth. You actually don't. Like, this film is, despite the budget, is small. It's nearly all set on that ship. It's those two ships, and that's it. The whole film.
Paul Anderson was offered the movie on the strength of the box office success of Mortal Kombat. He had to turn down X-Men, The X-Files, and Alien Resurrection.
Well, 2 out of 3. I mean, Alien Resurrection is an absolute turd. So I would have been interested.
Who you speak to.
Alien Resurrection would have been a really interesting one. I know you have a softer spot for Alien Resurrection, despite it being the brownest movie of all time. But it's not a terrible film. I just don't like. Again, one of the things we talked about just a moment ago is the importance of having a memorable cast, a likable cast, largely. That is one thing Alien Resurrection does not have. It might be memorable, but I fucking hate the cast in that film.
This is interesting.
The crew.
The scene in which Weir explains how to bend space and time in order to travel huge interstellar distances is paraphrased in Interstellar. Romilly uses the
Yep.
exact same demonstration to illustrate the theory, folding a piece of paper and pushing a pen through it while explaining it to Cooper.
Well, it's the perfect way to explain it in terms of layman's. It just doesn't make it as much sense because, again, the issue with Interstellar is that they're explaining it to a scientist. So you'd be like, yeah, I got it, dude. I got it.
The shot where Sam Neill stares out of a window, which then pulls back to reveal he's on the deck of a spaceship orbiting Earth, took the digital special effects house 10 weeks to achieve. The shot lasts for 45 seconds.
Well, that is the other location, admittedly. Sorry, I do apologize. There is the low orbit station above Earth, which you do see, but albeit briefly.
Right, I like this one. Paramount had originally planned to release Titanic in July 97, but when that film was plagued by delays, it had to be rescheduled to December. This left Paramount with a gap in its summer movie schedule. So they offered Event Horizon to Paul Anderson on the condition that the film be ready for an August release. This meant that the movie was officially greenlit a mere 10 weeks before production was due to begin. This had the unfortunate consequence that the production design was extremely rushed, which was the reason why many leading production designers turned down the film. Only 4 weeks were scheduled for filming, forcing Anderson to work 7 days a week. And we previously know that on those weekends he was filming the orgy scene.
Yeah.
And he started editing the film whilst filming the final scenes. The biggest problem, according to him, was that the studio was hoping for a big summer blockbuster. And they eventually got a rather distressing and disturbing horror film that was difficult for them to sell.
Yeah, no shit. Like that is the amazing thing about this film is that it got as big a budget as it did. Like this film is never getting that kind of budget in 2022. No fucking way. It's not a chance.
Clive Barker consulted on the project during pre-production.
Just can't escape him, can you?
No,
can't escape him with this film. But maybe, it's like lead into legacy. I mean, one of the issues with this film, we mentioned earlier the fact that there's like the famous unfinished director's cut of this film, and the fact that we'll never get it probably because so much of the footage has been damaged or poorly kept. It probably comes down to the fact that they only had 2 weeks to turn this film around in terms of editing and releasing the film because everything was just done at a breakneck pace. And we've mentioned the fact that one of the biggest issues with this film is the pacing, and you wonder if they had the usual, I think it would have been 8 weeks to work on this in terms of post-production, if maybe we would have got a longer cut of this film. And I know they were under pressure from, was it Paramount who made this film?
Yeah, Paramount, yeah.
Yeah, Paramount. They probably were under a bit of pressure. It's like, well, if it's going to be so gross, keep it bright and breezy. If nothing else, in terms of the runtime, nothing else about this film is bright and breezy. So I jumped into Legacy a bit.
That's okay. We can go into Legacy, but final fact for me, I wanted to leave this one till last. Arnold Schwarzenegger, Tommy Lee Jones, and Bruce Willis were considered for the role of Captain Miller. Now, take that with a grain of salt, but if that's true, can you imagine Arnold Schwarzenegger in that chair?
No, where we are going, you won't need eyes. It's just like, it just doesn't work, does it?
As that chair, no, not Weir. As Miller.
Oh, sorry, Miller. Oh,
Miller.
Maybe that works a little bit better.
Picture him in the chair.
Oh, in the chair, yeah. Arnold Schwarzenegger.
His one fucking leg fits in the chair.
Yeah, God, yeah. In fairness, like Arnold Schwarzenegger is weird. I was like, surely not weird, but yeah, I'd mixed up the two names. But I think that is an even bigger issue than the idea of Arnold Schwarzenegger playing the creator of the Event Horizon. Him being in that chair would have just been so laughable, man.
Yeah.
So
there you go. Then I was going to leave out until last, but as you've mentioned, Weir, Scott Glenn and Bill Pullman were originally considered for Weir.
Bill Pullman would have been good. Yeah.
Scott Glenn, I couldn't see it.
No, I'm not sure about Scott Glenn, but Bill Pullman I could buy into that. I feel like there's a lot of people who could have played Weir. I do think Sam Neill kind of gives him a somewhat unique edge, but there's no doubt that I feel like a lot of people could have played that. But in terms of legacy, I mean, we've mentioned a lot of these, but like its visual design, you feel it in other movies, you feel it in video games, which we'll get to in a minute. I actually think the movie is mega quotable. Like the where we're going, we won't need eyes. Like that has stayed in the lexicon. I think maybe it's just amongst me, my friends now, but I feel like that's hung around. That's for sure.
I keep thinking you're going to say roads.
Yeah, well, it's very similar. Where we're going, we don't need roads. In August 2019, a television series based on the film was reported to be in development by Paramount Television and Amazon Studios. Horror filmmaker Adam Wingard was set to executive produce and possibly direct it. Lawrence Gordon and Lloyd Levin, who produced the original film, were also involved. I'm not sure if that's still going ahead. It still kind of exists. Like, it could be going ahead. I would love to see an Event Horizon TV show. I'm not quite sure how that would work over an extended period. Like, do they stay on the ship? I don't know. But you stretch out into like maybe a 6-episoder, I think. But realistically, I prefer to just see a 2-hour movie.
6 episodes a season for 3 seasons because at some point you're going to have to end up in the hell dimension, aren't you? You're going to have to go to a TV show to show what's going on. You've got
to go full Doom at some point, don't you? But we've mentioned a few times it's famously unfinished. A lot of the footage still exists, but it's not in a great state, and I'm not sure if they're able to tidy it up. There's some really cool scenes, like obviously the original director's cut was supposed to be a lot more violent, but there was a grisly homage to 2001: A Space Odyssey's famous match cut, in which instead of a spinning bone transitioning to a satellite in orbit, Captain Miller finds a floating tooth in zero gravity with some gum still attached to it. That feels like one of those kind of CG show-off shots from '97. So I'm not sure if that would have aged fantastically if that had made it into the film. But of course, when people think of the unfinished cut, what they think of is the God knows how many minutes of hell scenes and all that nonsense, rather than what we've talked about, the fact that it could do with an improvement to its pacing.
DJ's original death scene as well had his entrails hanging out, Miller seeing him, but seeing that DJ was still alive, so Miller had to shoot him in the head.
Oh, yeah, that's nice. That's real. like horror films have a history of that, don't they? Of people's insides being on the outsides, but still being alive and having to be killed in the moments. But it was already gross enough, admittedly. And that's about it. I mean, I'll jump straight to video games, because I think in terms of legacy, that's perhaps where it's seen its biggest legacy because of Dead Space. And obviously, that's in the press at the moment, and maybe that's going to get the conversation started again on Event Horizon. At the moment, Event Horizon is on Netflix. Dead Space, the remake, is coming out in a few months. And not only that, but the original creator of Dead Space has created the Callisto Protocol, another video game which looks, unsurprisingly, just like Dead Space, which unsurprisingly looks just like Event Horizon. So I wouldn't be surprised if those, and I do think that the Dead Space remake is going to be a big hit, and we'll wait and see how the Callisto Protocol turns out. But I wouldn't be surprised that if that hits big, if conversations don't move back around to Event Horizon. Because if nothing else, with Dead Space, I think it was, maybe he just said it online as a passing comment, but John Carpenter, who's come up a few times in this conversation, he said that specifically, I could direct that. It's like, I think he actively wants to direct a Dead Space movie. And I know John Carpenter's recent output hasn't been nearly as good, but there is something very appealing about the idea of John Carpenter directing a Dead Space movie. But more specifically, in terms of a video game adaptation of Event Horizon, yes, there's not an official one, but Dead Space is as close as you're going to get. The only thing I would change is I'd make it more mental rather than, there are very literal monsters in Dead Space. So what I would do is, for my Event Horizon video game, is I would cross Dead Space with Silent Hill, which deals a lot more with that, that whole thing where you're walking around the ship, but then all of a sudden there's this kind of horror hellscape kind of like blends over the top of it, and you have to deal with that. So I would have Dead Space, but as created by the Konami Silent Hill team, if only for the fact that their music is absolutely amazing in those games as well.
To be fair, I couldn't think of anything other than Dead Space.
Yeah, totally.
Like you think, how would I have a video game of Event Horizon? Well, somebody's already done it.
Yeah.
And to the point where what I really enjoyed about Event Horizon, the same as Dead Space, was the fact that there's no weapons. Which, the fact they're a rescue team and they don't have weapons, okay, I get that. But he's basically just got a massive nail gun at the end. I know it shoots.
Well, that's not... I know he ends up with weapons, but Dead Space, it doesn't have traditional weapons.
Their weapons. And all their weapons are just things around, like an engineer would have on a ship.
Same as Alien. There's a long history of this,
Yeah, and that's what I like. Like, not everyone all of a sudden has, I guess, laser guns, phaser guns, or in space for some reason you've got automatic rifles. On a spaceship. So I appreciate all of that. And but to me, I'll go with your idea, because if we were making our own video game, Dead Space with the look and feel and sound of Silent Hill would well, it just allows, like, rather than just having traditional monsters, allows you to get a bit more imaginative, doesn't it? With basically the idea is that hell is fucking with you, which sounds pretty disturbing. So maybe that's a little bit close to what Callisto Protocol, but I think that also has monsters in fairness in the more traditional sense. So that just leaves score and soundtrack. Again, we've touched on it with, the orbital inclusion, which it's not quite, what was the movie that had the really dramatic change of tone in the, we did it recently for the podcast. It had a song at the end credits, which felt totally out of place. Well, was it Body Count?
Body Count, that was it, Body Count. It's not quite Body Count, but you get to the end of this film and then suddenly you have a very aggressive 90s dance track and it doesn't work. But other than, I already mentioned, the opening and closing credits, Michael Kamen, who I mentioned, we've covered numerous times, he's done Highlander, Die Hard, Roadhouse, Lethal Weapon, very much like the sound of the 80s. He did Brazil, a movie I watched recently. He was, hired to compose the film score. And it totally works. I don't think it stands out in the same way that maybe Aliens soundtrack does, but it's a memorable score, I think, for the most part.
Yeah.
And I actually think the problem with this film is because Paul W.S. is a fan of hybrid genre music, when he invites this electronic dance music duo to kind of add something to it, whatever, it is what it is. It's a movie from the 90s. I'm glad they largely kept that to the start and end of the film, and for the most part, they just let Michael Kamen do his thing. And I think for the most part, he did a pretty good job.
Yeah, I guess what's left now is just to rate it.
Yeah, this is going to be an interesting one because obviously we have very different opinions. I'm trying not to let nostalgia get in the way, and I did go back and forth on this. I still think this is just even as I'm saying that, it's a 3-star film. It's a 3-star film now. I mean, when I was younger, when it was released, I think it was a 4-star film. I still think it's mega memorable. But going back to it now, when, like you said, it's an issue with the genre. Horror films, by design, don't have the same impact as you go back to it. So it doesn't have the same scares, etc., etc. The pacing issues and the aggressive move to a more kind of visual, Clive Baker horror style. I'm not so keen on that second half of the film, so I'm going to say 3 stars. But it's a very strong 3 stars all the same. And it's still, I think for the most part, it still holds up.
Some might say 3.5.
Some might say, if I were you, if you were rating this on my behalf, you might well give it a 3.5 stars. But I'm going to stick to my guns and go with 3. A strong 3.
It's really weird, right? Because I said I wasn't a huge fan of it. I probably won't watch this film again. Mm-hmm. But I don't feel that it deserves low ratings. It's probably a 2, but closer to a 3.
Well, no, this is interesting because we had the same issue last week with Army of Darkness, but it was the other way round, where you were much more positive on it because you had more of attachment to it when you were younger.
Yeah.
But as we talked about it more and more, and we've had a similar thing with this, where I have that nostalgic attachment, I enjoy the film more. But as we talk about it, we agree on nearly everything. And then bizarrely, despite the fact that we start with the podcast, you saying you don't like it, and I say I do like it, and then you get to the end and we're like, 3 stars? And we both kind of agree. And as I said, it's almost the mirror of what happened last week with Army of Darkness. But I don't think it's unreasonable that we can have this conversation. We can both have slightly different feelings about it, but still come out with a 3-star review. Because again, we're trying to remove nostalgia and all that. The score is us that's why I'm not giving it a 4. I'm trying to remove my heart, not in an event.
And it is definitely a middle of the road. It does better in certain aspects than other films, but it lacks, again, in certain aspects in other films. So, yeah, I'll agree with you then. I'd give it a 3, a middle of the road for me as well.
Well, I think my point with this film is that some 3-star films are just 3-star right down Main Street, all the way through the film. You're like, I am watching a 3-star film. There are times when this is nudging towards, in terms of the genre, 5 stars. There are moments when it's really when it's kind of singing this film, when it's all, everything's working. It's borderline a 5-star film, but that'll only be for 20, 30 minutes. But when it's quite bad, it can feel like a 2-star film. Yeah. So we're going to settle on a strong 3. But yeah, when it's good, it's great, but it's just not always good, sadly.
Yeah, no, makes sense. So yeah, we'll give it 3-star films, but we actually haven't said would we recommend it.
Oh, yes, I would. I would still recommend this. I think other than the aforementioned few moments of slightly, rickety CG from 97, the physical, the fact that they built the ship, all these other things, I think it still looks great. I think it's still impactful. It's not going to have the same impact that it had in 97, but I think for a lot of people watching this, they'll still find it disturbing. We're jaded cops in the realm of horror films and action movies, these things. But I think a lot of people, they'll, if you watch it now and you hear that crackling tape, and then you watch that flickering scene of the orgy and stuff. And again, the reason I think the orgy scene works so well is the fact that it's not 7 minutes long. You only see a bit of it. So your brain fills in the gaps with all the other disturbing, fucked up stuff. So I think a lot of people would still find this, coming to it for the first time, I think they would still find it impactful.
You saw the 7-minute one. That's a challenging wank, isn't it?
Oh, that would be a rough wank. It's there's a lot of sex going on, but the amputees and the lack of eyeballs, I don't know. It's not for me. It's not for me. Well, is that going to be the tagline? Event Horizon 3 stars, a challenging wank.
I wouldn't recommend it. To be
really,
fair. No,
I really thought you were going to recommend it.
I watched it. I didn't. I had issues with it. I enjoyed certain aspects of it, but I wouldn't know anyone I would recommend.
Sorry, I'm still thinking about Event Horizon being a challenging wank. I do apologize.
So no, I wouldn't. I mean, I give it 3 stars, but I wouldn't recommend it to others. It's not.
I definitely wouldn't. I definitely wouldn't recommend it as a masturbation tool, aid, whatever you want to call it.
Right. So let's move on then.
Yes.
So basically, there are now. Well, I say now. It has been a while. There are actually 3 members of the Hey You Guys podcast team. There's you, myself, and Darry, our artist. Mm-hmm. So we figured there's 3 films for Halloween, so why not all 3 of us choose one? Mm-hmm. So next week, we've actually got Darry's choice, and you've got Darry's choice, I presume?
Yes, I do. And his is, I guess, the one that probably be a lot more folk will be keen on kind of thing. I feel like Army of Darkness and Event Horizon were slightly niche choices, perhaps. But Darry's choice, Scream, I mean, that was a massive hit back in the day. Yeah. And obviously...
That was 97 as well, wasn't it? Or 96?
Yeah. Was it 96 or 97? Well, it's mid-90s anyway, but obviously it's lived in the popular consciousness. Like, the 5th film was quite recently. And I actually makes me think I need to watch the most recent film because I've not actually seen it.
It's worth a watch. It is good.
Yeah, I've heard it's pretty good. I've actually quite liked nearly all the Scream films to different degrees. But if you think about, and I'm jumping towards what we should be talking about next week, you think about most horror series, once they go above 4 or 5 films, very few retain their quality. And I know Scream's quality has ebbed and flowed, but I don't think any of them have been truly bad.
It's interesting because it's the same
3
premise.
Is probably the worst.
It's the same premise because you have a guy in a mask running around stabbing. It's the same premise of any slasher film, but the way it's set out, the storylines, they all differ in some way, and they're all. I mean, me and my wife recently watched them in a row, probably at the beginning of the year, to the build-up of
5.
5, yeah. Mm-hmm. And what I'm really looking forward to, and this may be spoilers for anyone. They're doing 6 now, and Neve Campbell's not coming back. Not because she died in but the fact that for some reason
there was a pay dispute
in 2022. We're still not paying actresses what they should be paid.
I know, especially Neve Campbell, who is the face of the Scream franchise.
Yeah, but it will be interesting to see a film without Neve Campbell.
No, it will be. And the thing is, obviously, the Scream films have, they've retained that kind of meta element, which was so important to the first film. But again, you talk about films like, from around that period. I think of Scream and, in particular, what's it called? The Blair Witch Project.
Yeah.
The impact that those films had at the time, like they'd been, they'd been nothing like Scream. Actually, Wes Craven had done it a few years earlier with another film, which flew under the radar, has finally been reappraised. A New Nightmare was really good. I really enjoyed. At the time, I was like, I can't believe they're doing this. Yeah. It's a Freddy Krueger film, Nightmare on Elm Street. Sorry. So we'll mention that next week, and we will get into Scream. But yes. To cut a long story very short, Darry has picked Scream. So we're doing Scream next week. So please do join us for Scream. Thank you for joining us for Event Horizon. And bye, I guess. Cheers, guys. Happy Halloween. Bye.
Cheers, guys.
So where can people actually find us?
Oh, well, people can actually find us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook at HeyYouGuys80s. You can also drop us an email at HeyYouGuys80s@gmail.com. We like to read them out on the show, so please feel free to send them in. Any recommendations, just get in touch with us. We do like that. And we'd like to thank, as always, Darry Fletcher at Darry Doodles for the fantastic artwork that we're now producing.
Cheers, Darry. And a big thank you to Alexander Ortelan for the awesome intro music. He has no media presence as far as I can tell. He's very mysterious, but makes great music. So thank you very much.
And we'll see you next week. Thanks for listening.
Bye. Challenge your mic indeed. Hey, you guys!